Hey everyone, we're going to talk about how much product you actually need when you're putting the coating down on the floor. Do I need 2 gallons, 3 gallons, 8 gallons? How much material do I need? Can you help me coat this floor? So all these questions are going to come into what's the size of the floor and what is your application thickness. So to answer all these questions, of course, we have a couple variables going on, but the simple math is we're going to take the size of the floor, divide it by the square feet per gallon that we like to apply that at, and that's going to tell us how many gallons. So we'll talk individually about each product here because of course there's going to be a little bit of difference from your base coat to your top coat, but just know that if you use more base coat, you're typically going to end up using more top coat as well, just because when you're doing a flake floor system, your flake lands in a certain way that is going to be a little bit more jagged with a thicker base coat, which means it's going to drink up and use more top coat as well. If you go a little bit thinner on your base coat, your flake's going to land a little bit flatter. You're not going to need as much top coat, so you use a little bit less. I'm personally a fan of having a little bit of a thicker floor system, just so you have a little bit more impact resistance, maybe some scratch resistance, and it's just a heavier duty industrial floor system. If you go really thin, it'll still look really nice, it'll still clean really nice. I just like to have a little bit of a thicker build, just so that you've got a little bit more of a beefy floor system installed on this floor that a customer's paying a lot of money for. So the big question is, how much material do I need? We try to do packaging to make it as simple as possible. If you have a 2-car garage, just grab 2 of everything. 2 of the 2-gallon kits, 2 of the polyaspartic kits, 2 boxes of flake. Likewise, if it's a 3-car garage, 3 of the 2-gallon kits for your flake shield, 3 of your polyaspartic kits for the top coat, 3 boxes of flake. But if you want to dive a little bit deeper and figure out the exact math, exactly how much material you need, there's a couple of variables that are going to come into play, but then also set up systems internally for your business, because whatever you do, you want to make sure it's consistent and you do it all the time on every floor so that all your floors are the same. If they're getting a referral from a floor you've already completed and they say, I want my floor to look just like theirs, then of course having systems in place so that you're always doing the same square footage for your base coat, you're always doing the same footage for your top coat, then it's all going to jive and all be the same type of floor. If you typically like to have a smoother surface, you're going to use more top coat. If you typically like to have a rougher surface, you're going to use a little bit less top coat, but we'll get into that as well. So starting out with your ResinForce FlakeShield, this is the MVB primer universal coat all-in-one. You can use it as a standalone MVB to hold back up to 25 pounds of moisture pressure, or you can flake right into it. Of course, it's not going to hold back quite as much as 25 pounds. It will be reduced from that, but you're still going to have some moisture protection, better than just using standard 100% solids epoxy or polyurea or polyaspartic. So it's a great universal product as a primer. Just make sure it's fully covered in flake with a full broadcast, and then you'll be fine. So how much do you need? Typically, the way you're going to calculate all of this for all of your coatings is to take the size of your floor and then divide the size of your floor by how many square feet per gallon you want to go. So for my personal preference, I like to go 125 square feet per gallon as my base coat with this if I'm going to flake directly into it. So if I have a 2-car garage that's about 500 square feet or maybe a little bit smaller, then I'm going to take that 500 square feet divided by 125 square feet per gallon, and that's going to be 4 gallons. 4 gallons, of course, is 2 kits because each kit is 2 gallons, and that's why we're using 2 kits for a 2-car garage if it's 500 square feet. If it's a little bit smaller and you still use all 4 gallons, not the end of the world. That just means your base coat's going to be a little bit thicker. Maybe it's going to go down 400 square feet using 4 gallons. That's 100 square feet a gallon. And if you're anywhere in between, you're still within a range that's going to be adequate. But if you want to stick to exactly 125 square feet per gallon as your base coat, then that's how you're going to do it. Take the size of the floor, divide it by 125, and that tells you how many gallons you need. So if you're going to use a little bit more than 4 gallons, just crack into a 3rd kit. Or if you need a little bit less than 4 gallons, then that's where you're going to want to use a mixing bucket like this to give you maybe 3.5 gallons or 3.75 gallons or whatever the case may be. Just make sure your mix ratio is always going to remain 2 to 1, so that way it cures properly and you don't have any issues with the product curing. In the same fashion for your top coat, you're going to take your square footage of the floor, divide it by how many square feet per gallon you want to go, and that tells you how many gallons. So for your top coat, if you're going to average 130 square feet per gallon up to maybe 200 square feet per gallon, pick your sweet spot, what you personally like. Let's just say, as an example, you're going to go 150 square feet per gallon and your floor is 450 square feet, then that means you're going to use 3 gallons. If you're buying the 1.5 gallon kits, that's 2 kits, and that's why the general numbers are going to be a 2-car garage, you're going to use 2 kits, because a 450 square foot garage 400-ish is gonna be your average 2-car garage, maybe up to 500, maybe as low as 400. But by putting 3 gallons of polyaspartic onto a 450 square foot garage, that's gonna give you that 150 square feet per gallon. For your flake, the actual boxes of flake, they come in 40-pound boxes or 55-pound boxes, depending on the brand that you're purchasing. I typically like to apply about 1 box per 200 square feet. If you throw a little bit heavier, or if you're using a smaller flake or a hybrid flake or a terrazzo flake, you may need a little bit more flake per square foot. So maybe 175 square feet per box would be a little bit more adequate. So generally speaking, if you got a 2-car garage, use 2 boxes of flake. But if you really want to measure it out, if you got a larger 2-car that may be 550 square feet, I'd probably still get 3 boxes of flake for that, just to make sure you don't run out. If you run out of flake in the middle of doing the floor, you're kind of in a bind because your whole floor is completely wet with epoxy now with your FlakeShield base coat. And let's just say you get 90% of the floor covered. That 10% that's exposed will dry. If you don't have flake to apply to that, you're pretty much gonna have to start over. So you may not necessarily have to regrind the entire floor, but in the very least, you'll have to scuff up that area and then reapply a base coat and then apply the flake. So you may be able to get it to blend, but you're gonna see a blemish or a line where you started and ended. You may have the opportunity to go up to a control joint. So if a 2-car garage has a cross like this of a saw cut using control joints in the floor, you may be able to just redo 1 quadrant. That's why I personally like to honor the control joints in most floors. Leave those control joints exposed. You still want to coat in them, but just don't fill them. That way, if you make a mistake or you have to redo something or something weird happens and you have to do a repair 10 years down the road, or you have to do a repair tomorrow because you messed up, then at least you can just redo that 1 quadrant. You don't have to redo the entire floor to get it to blend without any blemishes.